how fitting that today is a very important deadline for Greek creditors, and I have a Greek with me joining us to discuss the market scenario. So perhaps you could shed light in terms of some of the drama that could play out today. It seems there's a lot of optimism that things are going to go okay.
I've never been concerned about today, Eleni. I think the market had priced in a lot of the bad news, and the prospects of anything bad happening, I think the ramifications would be too great for Europe right now, and it was something that was bound to happen. So we factored in a low risk of any kind of default or bigger problem transpiring from or emanating from Greece right now. Yeah, so not concerned at all.
So, Kimon, I mean, we're seeing risk on trade. It's evident in what we saw in South African trade today. We're in positive territory. US looking stronger. Asia also up into today's session. And a big focus on what we could see coming through from the US tomorrow on the employment front. Are you convinced that this economic data is actually pointing us to the right direction?
I think what we have seen has been quite encouraging. But one of the things we must be fully cognizant of, that it's an election year in the US. And I don't think you're going to see the Fed take its foot off the gas. And the liquidity that's been injected into the markets, and particularly in Europe, you know, that's going to buoy the markets going forward over the next couple of months. I'd only be concerned down the way, perhaps next year, once the prospect of higher rates starts rearing its head, and that could affect the markets. But I think in the short to medium term, equity market's going to be the biggest beneficiary of this. And I think also what we have seen is quite interesting in terms of gold. You know that I've had gold holdings, reduced those down now to 5% of a portfolio, and don't own any gold shares. I think what we might see is a bit of a sell-off in that area, and I'm very optimistic for equity markets going forward.
Okay, so Kimon, I mean, we just spoke to the Impact CEO, and, you know, packaging perhaps a very good barometer with regards to what we could see in the real economy. Not having a fantastic 2011, but citing imports as one of the big issues. Are you looking to these companies to give you a bit of a clue in terms of what we could see in the real economy?
I think what we will find is that the rand should help us. I think with risk coming on, that means international investors buying into South Africa, buying South African assets. That should also help the rand further. I don't anticipate that we're going to see major problems from inflation right now. There's possibly a prospect, if the economy stays this soft and growth is as weak as we have seen it, that we may see a rate cut, but I think that would be the final one for the season, for the cycle as well. And going forward, I think with the global liquidity situation the way it is, and the prospects of that staying pretty static for now, and possibly even increasing a little further, it's got to rub off onto South African assets, and particularly equity markets. Okay,
so what's interesting, we had Aspen out with results yesterday. The company was under pressure in yesterday's session. Today recovering, it's up around 2.6%. In fact, at the top of the top 40. Do pharmaceutical companies tickle your fancy at this point, Kimon? It's quite defensive.
I think, yes, they are defensive. I think you have to be quite specific. I think one got to do a lot of homework before you buy a pharmaceutical company. I think one has to investigate the patents that they have, etc., and the growth in their markets. I think Aspen's a good company. I think it's got good global reach. We know that they're doing quite well and expanding into Australia and internationally. It's not just a South Africa-focused company. And I think it's becoming a player in the world. So, yeah, I like Aspen. As to its valuations, I haven't done my homework there at all. But in principle, I think those are some of the companies that you do want to have in your portfolio, yes.
Kimon, and as you mentioned, you know, we could actually see a bit of pressure for the gold mining companies. AngloGold down 1% today. Goldfields and Harmony also losing around 1% today. Implats at the bottom of the top 40 once again. It's down 1.3%. What is your sense on the platinum sector, given the fact it was the worst performing sector last year? This year we have a bit more hope in terms of what could happen, but strike action has been one of the biggest issues for the sector.
I think for the mining sector as a whole, strike action's a problem. And if one takes a look at it, what we saw yesterday in South Africa, strike action's really a problem for all kinds of manufacturers in South Africa, not just the mines. So I think we're going to see that we're entering into bargaining season, where obviously the the workers actually do want higher wages, and I think they'll be negotiating that up now, and it's to be expected. It is that time of year. Unfortunately, it's not. I don't think they've got a lot of strength right now to get what they want, but they can be pretty disruptive, and by being disruptive, they obviously do affect profitability of certain companies. Yeah, our preferred entry into the platinum arena is through Anglos, and you know, it still faces the same kind of headwinds that Implats would face, but that's not big exposure in our portfolios.
So Kimon, let's also touch on China, because we're expecting Chinese growth to soften to 7.5%, at least this is what the country says for 2012. And then we also heard a bit of news with regards to China saying that it's not that optimistic with regards to iron ore demand. We've got Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton and other companies expanding further into the iron ore space. Does this concern you when you look at the diversified miners, or do you have exposure to Kumba iron ore, for example, and does this then create a bit of a negative environment?
No, we don't have exposure to Kumba. We prefer the diversified miners, and I'm sure you know that Anglos is our preferred play. It's under-owned relative to BHP. If I was a buyer of commodities, I'd also be trying to talk the price down. Although I do believe that the Chinese will try and moderate their growth, because I think what they've done is they were quite aggressive in growing the economy over the past couple of years, but you know, I think they've got to go through a consolidation period. So I don't anticipate better growth or higher numbers from China. What I do expect them to do is stabilize. And even if they are stable at 7.5, they're doing a lot better than any other economy that I can think of, or particularly of that size. So I'm not too concerned right now. Yes, I do think that the resource sector has relative value, and the diversified miners are my preferred play into that sector, and thereby lowering my risk of a portfolio.
Fantastic, Kimon. Thank you so much for joining us.